What would you do if everything you'd built, your home, your legacy, was stolen by the people you trusted most? The sun hung low over the rolling Montana plains, painting the horizon gold and casting long shadows across my 15,000-acre ranch. I'm Tom Hargrove, and that land was my blood, my sweat, my everything. For 30 years, I'd worked it, fought for it, poured my soul into every fence post and blade of grass. My wife, Ellie, and I raised our kids here, watched them grow, watched them leave. After she passed 2 years ago, the ranch was all I had left of her. It wasn't just land, it was us. But the Pinewood Homeowners Association had other plans. They'd been eyeing my ranch for years, ever since their cookie-cutter neighborhood sprouted up on the edge of my property. Karen Whitlock, their ringleader, was the kind of woman who could smile while twisting a knife. She'd show up at my gate with her clipboard and her fake concern, talking about community standards and property values. I'd nod, keep the peace, let her think she was in charge. I should have known better. Started small. A complaint about my cattle grazing too close to their precious lawns. Then a fine for unsightly barns that had stood longer than their houses. I ignored it, figured they'd tire themselves out. But Karen wasn't the type to quit. She had a vision. My ranch, carved up into neat little lots for her rich friends to build their McMansions. And she had the HOA board, her loyal minions, behind her. I didn't see the trap until it snapped shut. One morning, I woke to a sheriff at my door, papers in hand. "Eviction notice," he said, voice flat, eyes avoiding mine. The words didn't make sense. Eviction? From my own land? I paid every bill, every tax, for decades. But there it was, in black and white. My ranch had been sold. The buyer? Some faceless LLC tied to the HOA. The deed? Forged, they claimed, but it looked real enough to the county. Karen had worked her magic bribes, connections, lies, and somehow my life's work was no longer mine. I stood on my porch, the sheriff's boots scuffing my wood, and watched my world crumble. The cattle were gone, rounded up and sold. My equipment, auctioned. My home, boarded up. Karen drove by that afternoon in her gleaming SUV, her smile sharp as a razor. "It's for the greater good, Tom," she called out, like she was doing me a favor. I wanted to scream, to tear her apart with my bare hands, but I just stood there, numb. That night, I sat in a cheap motel room, the last of my savings barely covering the week. The walls were thin, the air stale, but my mind was racing. I wasn't going to let them win. Not Karen, not her HOA cronies, not the system that let this happen. I'd lost everything, but I still had one thing, my brain. And I'd spent 30 years learning every inch of this land, every law that governed it, every loophole. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. I started digging, not with a shovel but with public records, old maps, anything I could get my hands on. The county clerk's office became my second home. I spent days poring over deeds, plats, and zoning laws, my eyes burning from the fluorescent lights. That's when I found a crack in their perfect plan. The Pinewood neighborhood, their pristine little utopia, was built on land that wasn't zoned for residential use. Back in the 90s, the developer had pulled a fast one, bribing officials to push the permits through. The records were buried, but they were there, and I had them. I didn't confront Karen right away. I let her think she'd won. Let her parade around with her victory, hosting her HOA meetings, planning her next move. Meanwhile, I worked in the shadows. I hired a lawyer, not some slick city type, but a grizzled old-timer named Ray who'd been fighting land disputes since before I was born. Ray didn't care about money. He cared about sticking it to people like Karen. "This is going to be fun," he said, grinning over his coffee-stained desk. We filed a quiet lawsuit, not against the HOA directly, but against the county for improper zoning. The beauty of it? If the zoning was overturned, every house in Pinewood would be deemed illegal. No one could live there. No one could sell. The whole neighborhood, Karen's kingdom, would be worthless. I didn't want their money. I wanted them to feel what I felt. The ground ripped out from under them. The case moved slowly, but I didn't sit idle. I started showing up at HOA meetings, just to watch Karen squirm. She'd try to ignore me, but I could see the cracks in her composure. "You're wasting your time, Tom," she'd say, her voice tight. "This is over." I'd just smile and say, "We'll see." I wanted her to feel me breathing down her neck, to know I wasn't broken. 6 months later, the court date arrived. The courtroom was packed. Every Pinewood resident was there, whispering, glaring, their perfect lives teetering on the edge. Karen sat at the front, her face a mask of confidence, but her hands were trembling. Ray laid out our case, calm and methodical, every document a dagger. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with gray hair and sharper eyes, listened intently. When the county's lawyer fumbled, trying to defend the old zoning scam, I saw Karen's mask slip. Just for a second, but it was enough. The ruling came down like a hammer. The zoning was invalid. Pinewood was no longer a residential area. The residents had 30 days to vacate. The room erupted: shouts, tears, chaos. Karen stood frozen, her face pale as ash. I caught her eye across the room, and for the first time she looked small, defeated. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. But victory didn't feel like I thought it would. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Montana sun, expecting relief, maybe even joy. Instead, there was just emptiness. I'd taken down Karen, taken down Pinewood, but my ranch was still gone. The LLC had already sold it to a developer, and construction crews were tearing up my land, pouring concrete where my cattle used to graze. I'd won the battle, but the war was lost. I drove to Pinewood that evening, wanting to see it one last time. The neighborhood was a ghost town. Already moving trucks lined the streets, families packing up their lives. I saw kids crying, parents arguing, lives unraveling. I'd done this. I'd turned their world upside down, just like they'd done to mine. But it didn't bring Ellie back. It didn't bring my ranch back. It just spread the pain. I stopped at Karen's house, the biggest one on the block. She was on her lawn, loading boxes into her SUV. She saw me and straightened, her old defiance flickering. "Happy now, Tom?" she spat. "You ruined everything." I looked at her, at the life she'd built on lies and greed, and I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just pity. "You ruined yourself, Karen," I said. "I just made it official." I turned and walked away, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I played their game, used their rules, and I'd won. But at what cost? The ranch was gone. Ellie was gone. And now, I'd torn apart a whole community, not just Karen's, but the families who'd had no part in her scheme. I'd become the thing I hated, someone who destroyed lives to prove a point. That night, I sat in my motel room, staring at a bottle of whiskey I didn't touch. I thought about Ellie, about the way she'd laugh when we'd ride out to check the fences, the way she'd always find a way to see the good in people. She wouldn't have wanted this. She'd have told me to let it go, to find another way. But I hadn't. I'd let the anger consume me, and now I was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of my revenge. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could try to make it right. I called Ray and told him to start looking for loopholes to help the Pinewood family, some way to challenge the eviction, to give them a chance to stay. It wouldn't bring my ranch back, but maybe it would ease the ache in my chest. Maybe it would honor Ellie's memory, just a little. Karen was gone by then, her house empty, her SUV vanished. I heard she'd moved to California, chasing some new scheme. I didn't care. She'd lost her power, her neighborhood, her crown. But I'd lost something too, maybe the last piece of the man Ellie loved. The fight wasn't over. There were still battles to come, still ways to make things right. But as I stood on the edge of what used to be my ranch, watching the bulldozers carve up my past, I knew one thing for sure. Revenge doesn't heal. It just leaves you standing in the dust, wondering what's left. I spent the next weeks trying to claw back some shred of redemption. Ray, my lawyer, was skeptical when I told him to find a way to help the Pinewood families. "You sure about this, Tom?" he asked, leaning back in his creaky chair. "You already won. Why stick your neck out for them?" I didn't have a good answer, not one I could put into words. All I knew was that Ellie's voice was in my head, soft but persistent, telling me I'd gone too far. I'd torn down more than just Karen's empire. I'd hurt people who didn't deserve it. Ray dug into the zoning laws again, looking for anything that could delay or reverse the evictions. It was a long shot. The judge's ruling had been clear, and the county wasn't eager to admit they'd been wrong twice. But Ray was a bloodhound, sniffing out obscure precedents and forgotten statutes. He found a clause in the state's land use code that allowed for temporary exemptions in cases of public hardship. It wasn't much, but it was enough to file for an injunction, buying the families a few more months to figure out their next move. I didn't tell anyone I was behind it. I didn't want their gratitude or their pity. I just wanted to sleep at night without seeing the faces of those kids crying on their lawns. I started showing up at Pinewood again, not at HOA meetings this time, but at the community center where the residents were holding frantic discussions about what to do. I'd sit in the back, hat pulled low, listening to their fear, their anger, their desperation. Some blamed Karen, some blamed the county, some even blamed me. I didn't argue. They weren't wrong. One evening, a woman named Maria approached me. She was in her 30s, with tired eyes and a kid clinging to her leg. "You're Tom Hargrove, aren't you?" she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. I nodded, bracing for a fight. "I heard you're the one who got us this extension," she continued. "Why? After what they did to you?" I looked at her son's wide, curious eyes, and shrugged. "Didn't do it for them," I said. "Did it for me." She studied me for a moment, then nodded, like she understood something I didn't. "Thank you," she said quietly, and walked away. Word spread, despite my efforts to stay anonymous. Soon, other residents were approaching me, some wary, some grateful, some just confused. A few apologized for Karen's actions, as if they'd been complicit. I waved them off. "It's done," I'd say, but it wasn't. Not really. The developer who'd bought my ranch was moving fast, turning my pastures into a sprawling luxury estate. Every day, I'd drive by and see more of my land disappear under concrete and steel. It was like watching a piece of my soul get bulldozed. I tried to focus on the Pinewood fight, but the emptiness kept creeping in. I'd won my revenge, but it hadn't filled the hole Ellie left. It hadn't brought back the mornings we'd spent watching the sunrise over the hills, or the nights we'd sat on the porch, planning a future that was now just a memory. I started wondering if I'd betrayed her by letting anger take over, by becoming someone she wouldn't recognize. Then I got a call from Ray. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice grim. The county had caught wind of our injunction and was pushing back hard. They'd hired a big-shot lawyer from Helena, someone with deep pockets and deeper connections. Worse, they were claiming the Pinewood residents had known about the zoning issues all along, making them liable for millions in fines. It was a lie, but a convincing one. If it stuck, the families wouldn't just lose their homes, they'd be bankrupt. I met Ray at his office, the air thick with the smell of old books and stale coffee. "They're playing dirty," he said, tossing a stack of documents on his desk. "They want to scare the residents into dropping the case." I clenched my jaw, the old anger flaring. "And if they don't?" I asked. Ray sighed. "Then it's a bloodbath. Court fees, fines, maybe even jail for some of them." I felt sick. This was my fault. I'd started this war, and now innocent people were caught in the crossfire. I spent the next days rallying the residents, something I never thought I'd do. I stood in their community center, facing a room full of scared, angry faces, and told them the truth. "I'm the one who brought this down on you," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "I wanted justice, but I didn't think it through. Now we're all paying the price." The room was silent, the weight of my words sinking in. Then Maria stood up. "You didn't make Karen steal your land," she said. "And you didn't make the county lie. We're in this together now." Others nodded, some reluctantly, but it was enough. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. We fought back. Ray filed motions, the residents organized protests, and I used every connection I had left to dig up dirt on the county's lawyer. Turns out, he'd been involved in the original zoning scam back in the 90s. It wasn't enough to win the case, but it was enough to make him sweat, to make the county think twice about pushing too hard. Slowly, we gained ground. The injunction held, and the fines were put on hold. It wasn't a victory, but it was a lifeline. But life doesn't let you off that easy. One morning, I got a letter from the developer who'd bought my ranch. They were offering to sell me back a small parcel 10 acres, a fraction of what I'd lost for a price that would have wiped out my savings. It was a cruel joke, a reminder that they held all the cards. I tore the letter up, but the sting lingered. That night, I dreamed of Ellie, standing in our old kitchen, her smile sad. "You're still fighting, Tom," she said. "But what for?" I woke up with tears on my face, no answer to give her. Months passed and the Pinewood case dragged on. The residents were holding out, but the strain was showing marriages cracking, savings drained, hope fading. I kept working with Ray, kept showing up for them, but the truth was settling in: we might not win. The system was rigged, just like it had been when Karen stole my ranch. Justice was a nice idea, but money and power usually had the last word. Then, out of nowhere, Karen came back. I was at the community center when she walked in, her heels clicking on the linoleum, her face as smug as ever. The room went quiet, every eye on her. "I'm here to help," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. She claimed she'd found a buyer for the Pinewood land, someone who'd pay enough to cover the fines and let the residents stay. Sounded too good to be true, and it was. I did some digging and found out the buyer was another LLC, tied to the same developer who'd taken my ranch. Karen was playing both sides, trying to save her reputation while profiting off the chaos she'd caused. I confronted her outside the center, the sun setting behind us, the air thick with tension. "You never learn, do you?" I said, my voice low. She smirked, but her eyes were nervous. "You're the one who destroyed this place, Tom. I'm just cleaning up your mess." I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear flicker across her face. "Keep playing your games, Karen," I said. "But this time, I'm not the only one watching." She left town the next day, her deal falling apart when the residents refused to bite. In the end, we didn't win, not really. The court upheld the zoning ruling, and the Pinewood families had to leave. But we'd fought long enough for most of them to find new homes, to start over without the crushing fines. I helped where I could, connecting them with realtors, covering moving costs for a few, even letting Maria's family stay in my motel room until they got settled. It wasn't enough, but it was something. As for me, I never got my ranch back. The developer finished their project, a gated community where my cattle used to roam. I drive by sometimes, just to remind myself what I lost. But I don't live in the past anymore. I bought a small plot of land, 5 acres, nothing fancy. It's enough for a garden, a few horses, a place to watch the sunrise. Ellie would have liked it. Looking back, I see the cost of my revenge. I took down Karen, took down Pinewood, but I lost a piece of myself along the way. I thought I was fighting for justice, but I was fighting for pain. The real fight, I learned too late, was for something bigger, for the people who got caught in the middle, for the community we could have been if greed and pride hadn't torn us apart. What do you think? Was I right to fight back, to make them pay for what they did? Or did I just spread the hurt, trading one wrong for another? Where's the line between justice and vengeance? And how do we build something better when the world pits us against each other? Share your thoughts, I'd like to hear them.